There are some moments from childhood that fade with time. You forget the details, the sounds, even the faces. But every once in a while, something happens that stays perfectly clear for years afterward. For me, it was the sight of a stranger standing completely motionless beneath a streetlight in Fort Myers, Florida. I was 12 years old when it happened. My aunt and uncle had lived in Fort Myers for about 15 years, and every winter, my family would visit them for a weekend. It had become a tradition, partly because we wanted to see them and partly because getting away from the cold was always welcome. My cousin Ashley was 13, just a year older than me, and during those visits, we usually spent most of our time together. She was the kind of cousin who was always willing to do things I normally would have done with my friends. So even though we were still kids, we rarely had trouble finding something to get into. That night started completely normally. After dinner, the entire family sat together and watched a movie. When it ended, our parents moved into the kitchen, where they opened some wine and started talking. Ashley and I stayed nearby for a while, but neither of us was ready to go to bed. Then Ashley mentioned the canal. Apparently, people around the area had been reporting sightings of an enormous alligator, supposedly around 10 feet long. To us, that sounded impossible to ignore. "We should go see it," Ashley said. Her parents had already made it clear that neither of us was allowed to go outside that late. We were 12 and 13, after all, but Ashley kept pushing the idea until curiosity won. Eventually, we quietly slipped through the back door while the adults were still talking in the kitchen. For the first few minutes, nothing felt dangerous. We walked through the quiet neighborhood toward the canal, stopping at a nearby 7-Eleven to buy snacks. The cashier looked at us and warned us to be careful out there. At the time, I barely thought about what he meant. The streets were almost completely deserted, and as we continued toward the canal, the neighborhood gradually became quieter, darker, and more isolated. Neither of us knew yet that we were about to wish we'd never left the house. We had been walking for roughly 10 minutes when the surroundings began to change. The farther we went, the swampier the sides of the road became. The ordinary neighborhood seemed to disappear behind us, replaced by darker stretches of vegetation and empty streets. There were no groups of people outside, no traffic passing by, and almost no sound except our footsteps. Then Ashley suddenly stopped. I nearly walked into her. She was staring straight ahead. "What's that guy doing?" she asked. At first, I didn't understand what she meant. Then I looked toward the far end of the street. There was a man standing on the sidewalk. He wasn't walking. He wasn't looking down at a phone. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was simply standing there, completely still. Something about that immediately bothered me. If he'd been walking toward a house or checking something in his hands, there would have been an obvious explanation. But he wasn't doing anything. He appeared to be staring straight ahead, frozen in place. Ashley lowered her voice. "That's the only way to the canal." I looked at the street, then at the man. There were other ways around, but Ashley explained that we'd have to cut through people's yards or go through water that was basically sewage. Neither option sounded appealing, so we kept walking. Only now, we weren't joking around anymore. Our pace slowed as we approached him. Every few steps, I found myself looking at the stranger again, trying to understand what he was doing. We were about halfway between him and where we'd first seen him when something happened that made my stomach tighten. The man turned around. Not just his head. His entire body rotated toward us at once. There was no glance over his shoulder. No movement suggesting he'd just noticed us. One moment, he was facing away, and the next, he was facing directly toward us. Ashley and I stopped. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The man stood there watching us. Then he lifted one arm. At first, I thought he was waving, but it wasn't a normal wave. His entire arm moved, slowly and deliberately. Then the motion changed. His hand and arm began making a clear gesture for us to come toward him. Ashley looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us said anything. We simply turned around and ran. We sprinted back the way we'd come, our footsteps pounding against the pavement. Within minutes, we were already struggling to breathe. Eventually, we stopped in front of a small yellow house and dropped onto the grass, trying to catch our breath. Ashley stared back toward the street. "There are a lot of weird people down there," she said. For the first time that night, I understood why her parents hadn't wanted her outside alone. But we still hadn't seen the last of that man. After sitting on the grass for a couple of minutes, we finally started walking again. We had completely abandoned the idea of finding the alligator. Whatever excitement we'd felt earlier was gone. The canal no longer mattered. Neither of us wanted to go anywhere near it. All we wanted was to get back to the house. We started retracing our route, keeping our eyes on the empty street ahead. Then we saw him again. The same man was standing at the end of the street. He hadn't moved. At least, that's how it appeared. He was standing exactly as stiffly as before, with his arms hanging in an exaggerated, almost unnatural-looking posture beside him. This time, though, he was directly underneath a streetlight. That made all the difference. Before, he'd been little more than a silhouette against the darkness. Now, the light revealed his face. He looked to be around 40 years old. His hair appeared slightly slicked back. His nose seemed bent to one side, giving his face an unusual appearance. And he was smiling. It wasn't a wide grin. He wasn't showing his teeth. It was simply a closed-mouth smile, which somehow made the expression harder to understand. Then he raised his arm again. He started waving. Ashley and I stood there. We had already run from him once. We knew exactly what his gesture meant. But for some reason, I did something I still can't explain. I waved back. The instant I did, the man's behavior changed. He stopped waving. His smile disappeared. There was a brief silence. Then he ran. Not a casual jog. Not a fast walk. He suddenly launched himself into a full sprint straight toward us. Ashley screamed. She immediately turned and ran. I followed. For a moment, I couldn't even make a sound. I think I was in such complete shock that my body simply reacted before my mind could catch up. I remember thinking that screaming would only waste the breath I desperately needed. We ran as fast as we could. The street behind us seemed to disappear beneath our feet as we pushed ourselves forward. We stopped caring about staying on the road. We cut through people's yards, climbed over fences, and changed streets whenever we thought it would put more distance between us and the man. I don't remember hearing him say anything. I don't remember him calling after us. What I remember most was the sound of our own breathing. Heavy, uneven, desperate. Every second, I expected to hear footsteps closing the distance behind us. We just kept running. Eventually, after cutting through enough yards and streets, we finally reached Ashley's house. For the first time since we'd seen the man, I thought we were safe. Then Ashley tried the back door. It was locked. And suddenly, we had another problem. We had to knock. Standing outside that house, exhausted and terrified, we had no choice. The back door was locked. We had escaped the street, but we still couldn't get inside. So we knocked. That meant exposing ourselves to the adults and admitting that we'd disobeyed them. After sneaking out without permission, we knew there was a good chance we'd be in trouble. But at that moment, punishment was the last thing either of us cared about. We just wanted the door to open. Eventually, someone answered. We quickly gave them a simple explanation. We said we'd gone to 7-Eleven to get snacks while everyone was still in the kitchen. It wasn't the full story. We didn't mention the canal. We didn't explain why we'd been running through people's yards. And we certainly didn't tell them about the stranger standing beneath the streetlight and suddenly sprinting after us. Ashley's parents were more upset than mine. They knew we'd gone out late, and they made it very clear that we weren't supposed to do that again. In the end, though, we were let off with what amounted to a slap on the wrist. To them, it was a couple of kids sneaking out for snacks. To us, it had been something completely different. Even after we were back inside, the memory of that street wouldn't leave me. I kept thinking about the first time we'd seen him. He had been standing motionless at the far end of the road, as though he'd simply been waiting there. Then there was the way he had turned. Not his head, his whole body. And after we'd run away, somehow he had appeared again on our route home. That second encounter was the part one couldn't make sense of. He hadn't been chasing us when we first saw him. He had simply been standing there. He hadn't called out. He hadn't threatened us. He had only waved. And when I waved back, he ran. I still wonder what might have happened if Ashley and I had walked toward him instead of running away. Would he have spoken to us? Would he have continued waving? Was he simply a strange man who noticed two children walking around late at night? Or had he deliberately been trying to lure us closer? There was no way for us to know. We were 12 and 13. We had gone out looking for an alligator because we thought it would be exciting. Instead, we encountered a stranger we couldn't explain. And although we made it home that night, one image followed me long after the fear had passed. His face, lit by that streetlight. That strange, closed-mouth smile. And then the moment it vanished. 10 years have passed since that night. The details should have blurred by now. Childhood memories usually do. Yet whenever I think about what happened in Fort Myers, I can still picture that street. I can still picture how empty it was. I can still remember how the road seemed to stretch quietly toward the canal, with the surroundings becoming increasingly swampy as we walked. Most of all, I can still see the man standing beneath that streetlight. There was nothing obviously supernatural about him. He wasn't a ghost. He didn't disappear. He didn't perform anything impossible. He was simply a human being standing on a quiet street late at night. And somehow, that makes the memory more disturbing, because there are explanations for strange behavior. Maybe he was intoxicated. Maybe he was mentally unwell. Maybe he was simply an eccentric person who happened to be outside at the same time as two kids who shouldn't have been there. Maybe his gesture meant nothing. Maybe the sprint was nothing more than a bizarre reaction to me waving at him. But none of those possibilities change what it felt like to be there. We were children walking alone at night. We saw a stranger standing perfectly still. He turned toward us without first looking back. He motioned for us to come closer. We ran. Then, on our way home, he appeared again. He stood beneath a streetlight where we could finally see his face. He smiled. He waved. I waved back. And seconds later, he charged directly toward us. That sequence of events is burned into my memory. I don't know who that man was. I don't know why he was standing there. I don't know where he went after we escaped. And I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't run. What I do know is that the alligator we had gone looking for became completely irrelevant the moment we saw him. We had left the safety of the house because we thought we were chasing a story. Instead, we became part of one. Looking back, the cashier at 7-Eleven had warned us to be careful. At the time, we treated it like an ordinary warning from an adult who thought we were too young to be outside. Now, I think about it differently. Maybe he knew the area better than we did. Maybe he had seen enough strange things happen after dark to understand exactly why two kids shouldn't have been walking toward that canal. Whatever the truth was, we were lucky. We made it back to the house. We weren't hurt. And eventually, the night ended. But even 10 years later, when I remember that man's face illuminated beneath the streetlight, I still find myself asking the same question. What exactly was he waiting for?